Welcome to this video demonstration of the Intense Support Team Outpatient Demand and Capacity Model. This is one of a series of tutorial videos on a suite of modelling tools available for different components of elective care pathways. This video will deal specifically with the outpatient model last updated as of the 20th of January 2017, version 2.002 FII. So please ensure that the copy you have downloaded matches this to avoid any possible confusion. The outpatient model will only consider access to first outpatient appointments. If you need to model any other type of pathway, please look at the other models that are on the IMAS website. This video is intended to provide an introduction to the model, which should familiarise users with the layout of the model, the data requirements and the outputs of the model. Before you start the process of modelling your service, please ensure you have carried out the following. Read the Welcome tab on the model. Orientate yourself with the populated example. Engage with both information and operational staff who are involved in the care pathway, and that you agree on the underlying assumptions you are making to generate the data. Ensure you are familiar with the copy and paste special values method. This model does two things. It allows you to understand the variation in weekly demand and compare this against your average weekly capacity. It calculates an estimated ideal waiting list size and compares this against the current waiting list size. In doing this, it allows you to understand how much capacity you need to provide to keep pace with demand, allowing for variation, and how much additional capacity is required to clear an excess waiting list if the current list is too big.
This model does two things. It allows you to understand the variation in weekly demand and compare this against your average weekly capacity. Secondly, it calculates an estimated ideal waiting list size and compares this against the current waiting list size. In doing this, it allows you to understand how much capacity you need to provide to keep in pace with demand, allowing for variation, and how much additional capacity is required to clear an excess waiting list if the current waiting list is big. We'll begin the video tutorial with this Welcome tab here. The Welcome tab provides some initial notes regarding the purpose of the model, the data items that are required in order to generate results, the basic assumptions that underpin the calculations used within it, and its limitations. At the bottom of the sheet, there is a list of tabs within the workbook with a brief description of each tab. Looking at the requirements for this model here, you will need up to 52 weeks of referral data, which can be broken down by method of referral, that's e-referral or paper. Note that this model does not account for patients removed from the waiting list for reasons other than treatment, or abbreviated as ROT. You will need to account for these removals in your referral data before entering this into the model. Your current waiting list size, including the patients with and without a TCI date. You'd also need 1 to 3 months of patient level attendance data up to 1,000 rows, and an understanding of how many of your patients do not attend and what proportion of these patients are subsequently discharged back to primary care, and finally capacity figures for your service. It is important that the data you enter into the model is accurate as possible representation of your current service. Please ensure that you select a period which will reflect this. In terms of the limitations of the model, it is important to note that, as with any model, this workbook represents a numerical approximation of real-life events, so please be careful when interpreting the results. Anything that is produced by these models needs to be sense-checked against operational experience. Discussing the implications of the outputs with operational staff is an excellent method of sense checking, as, as such staff will frequently be in tune with what is going on in the service. Finally, a few general tips. Always begin with a blank template. These worksheets are complex, and it is easy to overlook minor changes that may affect the final output, so downloading a fresh template at the start of the process is highly recommended. Check any tick box options and slider positions in the data entry boxes before proceeding. This worksheet uses a system whereby sliders that are set to an extreme right will pull values from previously completed data tables. Sliders that are set anywhere else are effectively inputting the data directly without considering historic information. The input boxes will highlight this when this occurs by providing the historic value in brackets. As with any Excel workbook, the tabs can be moved around to suit the user, and blank tabs can be added as desired. We would recommend that you use the notes section or add a worksheet to record any details of any assumptions you make in the process by extracting the data that will populate this sheet, as well as any information regarding what you are using the outputs for, as this will assist in keeping track of your thought processes as well as version control. If you find yourself comparing particular tabs regularly, then moving the tabs to make them adjacent will also be a helpful action.
To ensure you are capable of extracting the data items needed to populate the model, you will need up to 52 weeks worth of referral data, as well as 1 to 3 months or up to 1,000 rows of patient level attendance data. This will need to be adjusted for patients removed from your waiting list for reasons other than treatment. You will also need to understand your service's DNA rate and the proportion of patients who are then discharged back to primary care. Clearly define the questions you want to ask and make sure that all staff involved in the process have a thorough understanding of the terminology being used. The model provides an approximation of real-life events. The results need to be sense-checked with operational staff.
We will now move on to the Demand tab. This worksheet provides you with the option to enter the name of your trust and its speciality. Either select from the drop-down menu options or type the text manually. Text that is entered or selected here will be reflected in some of the charts that we will see later on in this video. There are three main data items that are entered on this sheet. Firstly, the current waiting list size, the historic referral data, which goes into here, and the historic attendance information here. The current waiting list size can be entered using the slider at the top of the sheet. The value will change weekly and should be updated every week whilst working through the process to populate the model. This is important as it will allow you to make a comparison of the ideal or maximum sustainable waiting list size against the most current reported waiting list size in your final sign-off version. Historic referral data needs to be aggregated by week and is entered by method of referral, e-referral, or by paper. If you cannot break down your data to this level of granularity, then use either of the columns to enter the total number of referrals. It is important to note that the outpatient model assumes that all referrals are accepted, and that the only way patients are removed from the waiting list is either via an attendance of a booked appointment or discharge following a DNA or non-attendance resulting in a lost appointment slot. If your service does have removals from the waiting list for reasons other than treatment, or abbreviated as ROT, or discharge patients following a non-attendance that did not result in a lost slot, such as an advance cancellation, then these will need to be factored into your referral figures before they are entered into the spreadsheet. Alternatively, the flow model does incorporate these figures as part of the demand calculations and may be preferable if you wish to have ROT and cancellation figures visible as part of your modeling process. Finally, you can enter up to 1,000 rows of attendance data. This should ideally cover the last 1 to 3 months, each row representing one patient. This data will be used to provide visualization of patient experience in your service, for example when patients are typically seen. The DNA rate, if entered within the patient information, will also be calculated from this data. If you have calculated your DNA rate outside the model and are confident in its accuracy, then this can be entered manually on the parameter sheet. Although you may still want to complete this section here to sense check. We will now go on to the SPC tab, which will be used to check the information entered in the Demand tab. The SPC tab is a helpful way of visualizing the referral information you entered under the Demand tab. SPC stands for Statistical Process Control, and a chart such as this is used to assess whether a particular process, referrals received in this case, demonstrates a level of variability that is in line with what would be expected from a mathematical viewpoint. To put it another way, the chart helps you to see if there are any outliers in your data, or if there are any unusual patterns in your demand. There may be points highlighted with a red tag, visible here as shown. These highlight instances of what is called special cause variation, that is variation that is outside the expected norm. The tag shows two numbers. The top indicates the type of special cause variation. The demand and capacity models allows for 4 types, which are listed here. The bottom number on the tag indicates the week the event took place. It is worth noting that an instance of special cause variation does not automatically invalidate your dataset. There may be reasons that justify an especially low level of referrals. Public holidays such as Christmas are an excellent example. When looking at information on this tab, it's worth considering the following points about the referral data. Firstly, is it reasonably representative of what you expect to see in the future? Secondly, are there any ongoing trends, upwards or downwards, that you might expect to continue into the future? And thirdly, are there any instances of special cause variation that may be indicative of issues with your data or your processes which may bias the information you've entered? Check any highlighted points and ensure that you can account for them. If there are significant changes in referral activity levels that occur partway through your reference period, or if there are indications of ongoing trends in referral patterns, there are some ways to adjust the inputs to account for this. A word of caution, however, If you are inferring trends from your data that suggest significant changes from current levels of activity, make absolutely sure that these trends are real and not due to reasons such as data quality or seasonality issues. Actual step change in referral tends to be very rare. The saying of extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary proof is applicable here. With this warning in mind, the split function allows you to chop the left-hand side of the data off and base demand calculations on the right-hand side of the data only. An alternative method to using split function is to enter the data for the period of interest only and leave the remaining rows blank. Be aware that the robustness of your data will decrease with fewer data points. So in summary, the referral and activity data and waiting list sizes are entered on the Data tab or the Demand tab, and the referral activity can be visualized, assessed for anomalies on the SPC tab.
The Data tab is where historic referral data and current waiting list sizes are entered. Referral data is split by method of referral. If you do not have data at this level of granularity, then you can simply enter the total under either one of the columns. Enter this data in a per week basis. Note that total columns cannot be adjusted by the user. Keep the waiting list figures up to date on a weekly basis to ensure that the final sign-off version is based on the most current reported waiting list size. Attendance data can be entered for the last 1 to 3 months of activity at a patient level basis. These values are used to derive the DNA rate. If you have calculated this outside of the model, then this section can be considered optional, although it may be a helpful self-sense check. The SPC tab provides a visualization of the referral information. This will allow you to check your data for unusual patterns of behaviour which may indicate data quality issues or other process issues that require further investigation before proceeding. Key points to check on the SPC tab are: is it a reasonable representation of what you expect to be seeing in the future? Are there any ongoing trends that you expect to continue in the future? Are there any instances of special cause variation that may be indicative of issues with your data or your processes? These may bias the information you have entered. Check any highlighted points and ensure that you can account for them. If you do take trends from these data, then you must be absolutely sure that the trends are real. Investigate and check them before you use these values to inform your operational decisions.
The Capacity tab allows you to enter your outpatient clinics and the associated capacity under the core capacity and additional capacity tables. This is the core and this is the additional. Note that as this is the first outpatient model, only new appointment slots should be entered in these tables. Each of the tables allows users to enter the name of the clinic, such as the clinic code on PAS, 2 columns to describe the clinic, and the frequency and numbers of slots per clinic. The core capacity table, represented here, is where you should enter your core regularly funded capacity, whereas the additional capacity table, shown here, should be used for capacity that you anticipate taking place outside of the day-to-day clinic, such as weekend working, waiting list initiatives, and so forth. Below the capacity tables are historic activity tables, shown here. This is where you can enter the activity that took place over a 52-week period, split by core and additional activity as per the capacity tables above. The upshot of having these two sets of tables is that users can view their demand capacity balance against their expected capacity, or compare it against what activity took place the previous year to see if that was sufficient to meet the existing demand. The capacity values can be switched between the capacity and historic activity tables using this box. As a word of warning, be very clear what question you want to ask and what data sources you are using before you read the summary values, as it is easy to toggle a switch and take the wrong figures. The selection boxes at the top of the page allow you to either pull the capacity values for the data as entered or into them directly using the sliders. Note that the calculated values are shown in brackets if direct data entry via the sliders is used. Note that you can access the historic data tables using the link at the top of the worksheet. There is a similar link next to the historic tables that allows you to return to the top of the sheet. Obtaining an agreed measure of capacity is frequently a point of significant challenge in the demand and capacity process. This will often be due to a number of factors. For example, capacity being changed reactively to meet demand requirements, or clinics configured in a particular way due to historic reasons that may not otherwise make much sense. Gaining a clear idea of the capacity of your service will often be beneficial in and of itself, as it may highlight processes that could be improved as part of the capacity assessment process. It is worth reviewing the findings from this page with operational staff. Consulting with the booking staff is also an excellent sense check, as they will frequently have a good feel of what is occurring on the ground and can confirm if the figures are a reasonable reflection of what is happening on the ground.
The Capacity tab is where you enter the capacity of your outpatient service, taking into account new slots only. The tab allows users to enter their anticipated capacity in two ways: using the core and additional capacity tables, which will calculate the values based on the aggregation of clinic figures; using historic activity, which will compare historic activity against expected demand. Note that these are two different questions, so please be clear on which you think is most relevant to your needs before proceeding. Having an in-depth understanding of your service's capacity is a major benefit of going through the capacity assessment process. Although this may initially be a laborious process, it is very worthwhile in the long run.
We will now look at the Parameters tab. The boxes on the left of this tab provide a mix of metrics that describe the service based on the data entered in the Demand tab. Some of these, such as the appointments, where choice not given, are primarily for interest and do not affect the final outputs of the demand capacity calculations. Of relevance to the calculation of capacity are the number of referrals per week, yeah, the number of DNAs, and the proportion of these DNAs that are discharged back to primary care. Note that although these are based on historic data, these can also be changed using the sliders. Example, if you want to look at different scenarios. To iterate an earlier point, the DNA rate specifically relates to non-attendances that result in a lost slot. This will generally encompass same-day non-attendances, but may include patients whose appointments is cancelled ahead of time, example the day before, but where the slot cannot be reliably rebooked for another patient. As with our other calculating metrics, if you change a value from the calculated based on the data from the demand tab, the old value will be shown in brackets. In your Notes tab, you should document the rationale for your decision. In calculating the overall amount of capacity required, it is the demand plus rebooked DNAs. The right side of the Parameters tab consists of metrics that are not drawn from historic data. This includes a description of the first outpatient pathway, setting when urgent patients will be seen by weeks, and what time frame routine appointments are expected to be seen within, as well as a couple of additional metrics. The proportion of urgent referrals received as a percentage of your total referrals, the proportion of your DNAs that are then discharged normally to primary care.
The Parameters tab pulls some of its information from the Demand tab, and the information on this page effectively acts as the engine for the calculation in the Summary tab. Points to note. There are a number of matrix displayed on this page. Some of these draw on data entered in previous tabs. If this is so, then moving the sliders anywhere from the extreme right will result in historic values being shown in parentheses alongside the new value. We would recommend you record the rationale for using alternative values if doing so. Sliders on the right side of the tab do not draw from historic data. These data input boxes allow you to enter the time frame in which you expect treatment for patients to occur for urgent and routine patients. Additional matrix used in the demand calculation, percent of urgent referrals and percentage of DNA discharged. These percentage values will need to be calculated outside of the models. Percentage DNAs, non-attendance resulting in a lost slot, will generally cover some day non-attendances and may include patients who cancel more than a day ahead of their appointment, but where it may not be practically possible to call another patient in short notice. Anything you see here which does not meet expectations based on operational experience should be investigated.
The Summary tab is where all the information entered thus far is brought together. Generally speaking, there are a few cells which can be used to provide a reasonable indication of the balance of demand and capacity. Firstly, the 65th and 85th percentile of demand and currently available total mean capacity. Ideally, you want your capacity to lie somewhere between the 65th and 85th percentile of the demand, as shown here. Secondly, the maximum sustainable waiting list size and a current waiting list size for new patients. A note of caution, the values provided here are estimates. The degree of intervention required to rebalance capacities or waiting list sizes is a matter of operational judgment. The maximum sustainable waiting list size value should therefore be viewed as a guide rather than a hard limit. The area chart represents figures graphically. Demand is shown as a line, while capacity is shown in orange and additional capacity in green. Other information presented on summary pages are additional descriptive statistics that may be of interest but will not otherwise affect the demand and capacity calculations.
The Summary tab does exactly that, summarises your information. There is a lot of information contained in this tab, however only a few of these cells are required to gain an idea of demand, capacity balance of your service. To determine if there is sufficient capacity to deal with what is coming through the door, look at average weekly capacity compared against the 65th and 85th percentile of demand. To determine if your waiting list size is a sustainable size, compare it against the waiting list consistent with delivery cell.
The Planning tab allows you to add or take away capacity in the future and see the expected effect on the waiting list. This allows for scenario planning, for example, waiting list initiatives, or to proactively plan around known blockages in capacity, such as around conference dates. As with many of these tools, a note of caution: the model assumes even distribution of activity and capacity. The waiting list trajectories are therefore based on the interaction between average demand and average capacity, which will not actually happen in reality. These trajectories are purely illustrative and are intended to give an indication of likely timescales for recovering an ideal waiting list size. They should not be used to guarantee the date by which ideal waiting list size will be achieved. The progress of the service can be measured against actual activity by entering actual activity data in the table below it. The results are reflected in the Graphs tab. The projected trajectories are visible here for the scenarios entered against the recommended waiting list size. The final chart shown here is a representation of the spread of demand activity, the mean and the 85th percentile against an idealized distribution curve. This is really of interest only.
You can use the Backlog and Graphs tab to play with your future capacity and see the effect of increasing or decreasing your capacity on waiting list sizes. Do note, though, that the trajectories won't take into account variation and assumes an even spread of activity and capacity, so it should not be used to guarantee timescales, for example, specific waiting list size reductions.
The final tab we will go through is the Calculations tab. This is non-interactive, but is driven by data entered in the Demand and Parameters tab. The purpose of this tab is to show the calculations used to estimate the maximum sustainable waiting list size. For those of you who have attended the one-day theory course, this is a tabular representation of the party hat scheme. As a quick summary, these tabs show the average routine and urgent requests received per week, distributed evenly among the weeks specified for treatments in the Pathway tab. There are a number of patients who are removed from the waiting list via discharges, and a small number who are rebooked following a non-attendance that results in a lost slot who are added back into the waiting list. The total number of patients remaining in the system are cumulatively added, which provides the maximum number of patients who should be waiting at any given moment. If all of this doesn't make much sense, don't worry too much, as this is simply meant as a demonstration of the calculation method. Understanding how to use the outputs is more important in this instance.
The Calculation tab is non-interactive to show you the calculation used to estimate the maximum sustainable waiting list. Don't worry if this tab doesn't make much sense. Understanding your data and how to use the outputs is much more important. Thank you for watching this video. For more information on the work of the Demand Capacity team, please go to our website. We would very much welcome your feedback on this webinar. Please send all feedback to our group email address. Thank you.